Look, I basically use these reviews as an outlet to write comedy, but there's not really a whole lot I can joke about with these films, because nothing really happens in them. Oh shit! So first I saw Memoria, and it was the epitome of no thoughts, head empty. It's a pretty neat concept of a woman basically being haunted by vine booms coming from what seems to be the core of the earth, but it really just was not for me. Which is weird because I typically like incredibly slow films that lack context. I very much like Mikhail Haneke and Andrei Zyganstev, but the pacing and style of Memoria felt largely unneeded and unearned. I failed to see how much of this film would be lost if it had similar pacing and style as Arrival. The 2-hour runtime really brought this down for me, considering that the concepts, characters, and style weren't entirely unique or had any new perspective on them. It really didn't justify the runtime. The sci-fi concepts explored felt very familiar. I mean, based on the title alone, you know it's going to be about memory, but the film treated that reveal as some earth-shattering revelation that recontextualizes everything, but it didn't. And I don't feel bad for quote-unquote spoiling that because it's in the title. Even if you have a passing knowledge of sci-fi, you know that memory forming identity is a pretty fundamental concept of the genre. Both Apples and Total Recall are sci-fi films about memory, but are completely different experiences because they take the base concept in unique directions. Not every text needs to revolutionize a genre, but it certainly made Memoria less special. There were a couple of scenes early on that I was actually really engaged by. The mystery and attempts to uncover and understand what was going on were interesting, but by about the 40-minute mark I felt like I experienced all the emotions the film was offering and understood what it was thematically going for. It was made even worse by how a character randomly appears towards the end of the film to both explain the text and subtext in painstaking detail like it's an Alex Garland film, which seems incredibly self-defeating for attempting to do the whole contextless Haneke style. I also didn't really find the tone or atmosphere to be unique or compelling beyond seeing the Colombian landscape and soaking in the sound design, which, credit where credit is due, was very well done. I've never really properly understood the criticism of a performance being played broadly, but this is a pretty good example of it. Tilda Swinton was decent, but all of the supporting actors didn't really feel like they knew the ins and outs of their character, and I don't really fault the actor for this, as the dialogue used to characterize them lacks any specific idiosyncrasies to the point each character feels like the exact same person. Whilst this style of writing and performance might work in a Yorgos Lanthimos film, it really didn't work here. Something that I found very weird about this film was how little push and pull there was in any given scene. No one really questions or has a differing opinion to Tilda Swinton. She just befriends and does things without anyone stopping her or asking why. Not that I'm arguing for a conventional antagonist, but this may be one of the only films I've seen where not one person has a slight disagreement with the main character. And this alone made for really flat and boring character dynamics and general story. You can argue that a lot of Haneke's films are incredibly slow, plotless, and meandering, but at least there's drama and interesting dynamics. The people that are really loving this film are praising it for being a meditative experience, and that's something I just didn't really get from it. Although that is an experience I get from a lot of Terrence Malick's films, which are equally divisive, so I guess to each their own. Alright, I'm gonna get into spoilers, but let's face it, you don't care. Skip here to see my review of Men. Hot, sweaty men. Where the film really lost me is where Tilda Swinton told the theme explainer to lie down and sleep in front of her. It goes on for about 10 minutes and I just sat there questioning what the author's intent was. What makes it even weirder is that a similar thing happened in Beginning, which is another film that I saw that I actually really loved. But in that film it felt earned. There was a lot more to think about and the film had a lot more to offer in terms of emotions and visuals. It also felt way more mature. I'm not saying that genre texts are lesser than realism, but Memoria's meandering scenes just felt like they existed because that's what other acclaimed auteurs do, and that's how smart films are made. Apparently a lot of people are loving this film and I don't want to take that away from them, but this really wasn't for me. And I'm giving this like 4 or 5 out of 10, I'm very indecisive, I don't know. I also saw Alex Garland's new film Men, and it wasn't great. It's definitely this year's Mother, but at least with that film I was mildly enjoying the haunted house roller coaster. A lot of people have been strongly criticizing this film for its lack of subtlety and restraint, which all I have to say to that is, have you ever seen an Alex Garland film before? Both Annihilation and Ex Machina aren't exactly subtle with their intended subtext, but Men is probably the most obnoxious in this aspect. It is also arguably the least literal of his films, which is something that I've always struggled to connect with, as I'm always reminded that I'm watching fiction manipulated by an author rather than being invested in the characters or story. Simply having crazy visuals can only go so far until it becomes boring because you lack any investment in it. The biggest problem with men's non-literal elements is their poor concrete characterization and textual motivation. Whilst films like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Possession and Raw have a gradual escalation of weirdness, front-loading their narratives with character building and dynamics that eventually motivate the non-literal, Men doesn't really do this. All of the characters don't feel like they exist in the world of their own, they feel like they exist for the sake of the script. Harper isn't a person, she is a vessel, which irony for a story about abuse caring little about its female lead character aside, meant that I had very little investment in her plight as Garland put little effort into fleshing out the character. It felt like Harper begins at the start of the film and ceased to exist when you exit the theater because her purpose was to fulfill a role and hit certain beats. The further irony in this is how little cause and effect there is. It winds up becoming a succession of things happening until they stop happening because Garland said so. And keep in mind, this is coming from someone whose favorite film is literally just a guy walking around a city and talking to people for 2 hours. The point where the film really felt like a first draft is when Jessie Buckley gets a call from work and says, "I've been checking over the figures," which not only does sound like placeholder dialogue, that's all we get to know about her line of work. She works with numbers, that's it. Does she work for an accounting firm or a bank or a phone service provider? Although that isn't to say the film is all bad, it's pretty well shot with lots of beautiful locations and colors. The score was really well done, although a couple of tracks felt way too reminiscent of Annihilation. Jessie Buckley did a fine job with what she was given, but it's nowhere near the level of performances in The Lost Daughter or I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Rory Kinnear was pretty great and did a particularly good job in making each of his characters feel very distinct. He not only changes his accent and rhythm of speech, but he greatly changes how each character moves and holds themselves. I also particularly enjoyed the tunnel scene and bar scene, but that was really about it. Spoilers now, click off the video, go fuck yourself. The FaceTime conversations with a friend were genuinely baffling. They literally just talk about the events of the film and restate the questions that the audience would be asking. Oh yeah, there's a weird guy stalking me. Oh, that's weird, why is he doing that? I don't know, we're only in the first act. There is even a line when the friend says, "You could use the axe right behind you," and then it cuts to an extreme close-up of the axe with foreboding music, and I burst out laughing. A lot of people are gonna take issue with the ending, it's very over the top, and whilst I respect the film for going there, I was really uninvested in the characters and story by that point, so I didn't really have the intended reaction that I was supposed to have, and neither did the theater I was in. Some people were clearly trying to hold back laughter. The weird part is that a similar concept was explored in the side quest of Witcher 2, and yes, I'm gonna keep bringing up The Witcher, but this side quest was 5 minutes long in a 30-hour game that offered a lot more to experience. But by far the worst aspect is the boyfriend appearing at the very end to explain the subtext and text, which was genuinely fucking annoying. I thought it was a pretty decent parallel to have what happens to the monster echo what happened to him when he fell to his death, but then he literally just explains it. Because a film with an elongated multiple birthing sequence is so terrified that you might interpret it slightly different from the author's singular intent. The irony of overstuffing a film with so much non-literal elements only to systematically explain those elements like a Hideo Kojima game is such a baffling creative choice. I honestly respect it. Anyway, I wasn't big on this film, and it's definitely made me think how much Danny Boyle brought to the table with 28 Days Later and Sunshine. So yeah, 4, possibly 3 out of 10, I don't know. Why do you care? Just click off the video, just leave.